colleges should you apply to? The College Board recommends between 5 and 8. U.S. News and World Report recommends anywhere between 4 and 15. But what about 20? 30?
Mr. Greenberg. Mr. Greenberg.
What is it, student me?
I heard about some kid who applied to 100 colleges.
I've heard those stories too. And although they're still rare enough to generate headlines, they're part of a much broader trend. Increasingly, many students are opting to apply to far more than the conventional 4 to 15 colleges. In fact, the phenomenon has become so prevalent that a new term has been coined to describe it: shotgunning. The basic premise of shotgunning is simple. You apply to a large number of schools, 20, 50, even 100, with the idea of maximizing your chances of getting into at least one good one. Now, shotgunning has gotten a bad reputation for reasons that are at least somewhat legitimate, but I predict that this phenomenon is not going away anytime soon, and that's for one simple reason. Kinda works. But it's not for everybody. So in this video, we are going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of applying to an unconventionally large number of colleges, with the ultimate goal of helping you decide what the right number of colleges is for you. Spoiler alert, it may be more than your college counselor said. So a traditional college application list is broken into 3 categories: reach, target, and safety. Some people use different terms or break them into further subcategories, but the general principle is going to be the same regardless of who you ask. The schools in your reach category are the ones you'd be thrilled to get into, but where your odds of admission are actually quite low. The schools in your target category are the ones you'd still be happy to go to, but where your odds of getting in are a little bit more realistic. And the schools in your safety category are generally not your top choices, but they're schools that you're highly likely to get into. And it's important to have at least a few schools in this category in case you don't get into somewhere else. Now, before we go any further, please note that the list we've just made is for a hypothetical student with mostly A's, an SAT score of around 1500, and strong extracurricular involvement. If your credentials are not as good as that, some of the schools shown in the target or safety range may still be reach schools for you. So keep that in mind. Anyhow, shotgunners challenge this balance by adding extra schools, particularly to the reach and target categories, giving them a top-heavy list. The reason they do this is simple. Because if you apply to a large number of highly competitive schools, even if your chances of getting into any one particular school are very low, your odds of getting into at least one of them are a little bit higher. It's the same reason your chances of winning the lottery are a lot better if you buy 100 tickets than if you only buy one.
Mr. Greenberg, I don't know if I like that comparison. I mean, a lottery is random, right? But the college admissions process? Look, if you have like a 2.0 GPA, you can apply to every Ivy League university. You're still not gonna get in.
Student me, you're right, but only to a certain extent. Sure, it would be nice if the college admissions process were some meritocratic endeavor designed to reward the brightest and hardest working students, but the truth is that there's a lot more randomness than most people realize. Part of that's because what makes an applicant good is subjective. That heartfelt college application essay that you wrote, it may move one admissions officer to tears, but it may come across to another admissions officer as phony and insincere. You also have to keep in mind that schools have their own needs. They want to build communities that are diverse, and that doesn't just mean diversity of race. It also means diversity of gender, geography, and academic and extracurricular interests. Like, they're not going to pick an incoming freshman class entirely of political science majors, or entirely of engineers for that matter. They want a balance, and where you fit into that balance depends on who else is applying to those schools, which is something that you can't control and may not know. I've heard stories from friends who work in admissions. The chair of the linguistics department will come to them and say, "We don't have enough students in our program. Can you admit some more linguistics majors?" Or the director of the jazz band will come to them and say, "Our top 3 saxophone players are graduating this year, and we're going to need to fill that that void. And if you happen to be a prospective linguistics major who can also play the sax, then congratulations, because your chances of getting in have just dramatically improved. Will that be enough to make up for your 2.0 GPA and an SAT score 300 points below the school's average? Of course not, but it's often enough to push you over the edge. Now, we may not get to see this randomness because it's taking place behind closed doors, but I have witnessed the result of this randomness in the experiences of the students I've mentored. I had a student who got into Columbia, which has an admit rate of about 4%, but who got rejected from Cornell, which has an admit rate roughly double that. I had a student who got into Georgetown, which has an admit rate of roughly 12%, but who didn't get into BU, which has an admit rate closer to 20%. So the college admissions process may not be a lottery, but there's still a significant degree of luck involved. The more schools you apply to, the more likely you'll be to get into a prestigious one.
Okay, I get it. So applying to a lot of schools can yield results. But Mr. Greenberg, I just completed my application to Brown, and it took legit like 20 hours. So applying to 30 schools? That's like 600 hours. Who the hell has time for that?
Fair point, student me. Shotgunning is definitely not for the lazy, but it's also not necessarily as time-consuming as you would expect. Remember that essay that you wrote for the Common Application when you applied to Brown? Well, did you know that you can use that same essay for over 1,000 other schools? Granted, most competitive schools will also have additional supplemental questions, but even those tend to be fairly similar. That doesn't mean you can just copy and paste the same response, but once you've written a few of them, it's generally possible to adapt an existing essay to a new prompt, or at least recycle the same ideas. So applying to 50 schools is more work than applying to 10, but it's not 5 times as much work. If I had to guess, I'd say it's more like double.
Okay, Mr. Greenberg, I get it, but what about cost? I mean, Brown just charged me $75 to submit my application. $75 for 50 schools? We're looking at over $3 grand. I can't afford that.
True, but let's put that figure in perspective. Including room and board, the average tuition in the Ivy League is around $80,000 per year. Compared to that, a $3,000 one-time expense isn't all that much. And if you come from a low-income family, most schools will allow you to request an application fee waiver. So if you're willing to go through some extra effort, you might be able to apply for free. More importantly though, shotgunning can actually save you money in the long run. Because if you're applying to a ton of schools, you're probably going to get into several of them. And that will give you a lot of leverage in negotiating a good financial aid package.
Okay, I get it. But what about the question of fit? I mean, don't you think I should be limiting my applications to the schools that I'd actually want to go to?
Well, that is a legitimate concern too. I mean, just because a school is prestigious doesn't mean you like it there. And why waste your time applying to a school that you wouldn't be happy at? So if you're the kind of student who has very specific needs, shotgunning is probably not the best strategy for you. But again, it depends on your needs. So, student me, you told me that you were applying to Brown. Why?
Well, to be honest, it's mostly the open curriculum. I like freedom. I don't want some crusty old dude telling me which classes to take.
But if that's how you feel, then you might not be very happy at a school like Columbia, which takes a lot of pride in their core curriculum.
But I'd also be in New York City, which would be amazing. And when it comes down to it, most of the classes in the core curriculum actually look pretty interesting.
Okay, maybe you can keep Columbia on your list. But if you'd like to be in a big city like New York, are you sure that you want to be applying to Dartmouth? I mean, that's in the middle of nowhere.
I know, but I like nature too, and I suppose the small school size could also have some advantages.
Well, student me, it's starting to sound like you could be happy almost anywhere.
To be honest, that's kind of true. Don't tell colleges this, but I actually have no idea what I want. I mean, I'm only 17, I'll figure it out later. All I know is that I want to go to a prestigious school because I think it's going to give me more opportunities down the road.
And if that's how you feel, you'd probably benefit from applying to a large number of colleges. Whereas if you have more specific needs, you may be better off curating your list more selectively.
You know, when you put it that way, shotgunning actually sounds pretty reasonable. But then, why do so many people hate it so much?
Well, the answer to that is simple too. Because no matter how advantageous shotgunning may be for you as an applicant, it's bad for pretty much everybody else. If you apply to a bunch of schools, you're probably going to get into a bunch of schools, but ultimately you can only go to one, which means you're going to be taking spots from people who might really want them. It can be bad for colleges too. College rankings are based at least in part on yield rate, which is the percentage of admitted students who actually end up accepting their offer of admission. And they know that students who are applying to many schools are not very likely to actually attend. Finally, shotgunning can easily spiral out of control. Imagine that the average student applies to the 5 to 8 colleges that the College Board currently recommends. Now imagine that everybody decides to double that number. The result is twice as many overall applicants. So a school like Harvard, which receives roughly 50 or 60,000 applications a year for under 2,000 spots, an admissions rate of less than 4%, is going to be getting over 100,000 applications for the same number of spots, leading to a much lower admissions rate of under 2%. So the more schools people apply to, the fiercer the competition gets, and that gives students even more of an incentive to apply to a large number of schools, to increase their already dwindling chances of admission. So maybe it would be nice if colleges worked together to stop shotgunning before it spirals out of control. One way they could do that is by imposing their own limits on how many schools you're allowed to apply for. They already have a system like this in many countries, including the United Kingdom and South Korea. But until American colleges decide to do something like that, it benefits you as an applicant to apply to as many schools as you can handle. How many is up to you, but I don't think that 20 or 30 is unreasonable, especially if you're someone who prioritizes prestige, but don't care too much about which specific school you end up at. At any rate, I think it's time we got over this myth that shotgunning makes you a bad person or makes you crazy. It may be a destructive and unsustainable practice, but its prevalence speaks more to the failure of the entire system. In other words, don't hate the player, hate the game. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, leave a comment down below letting me know how many colleges you'll be applying to. Thanks as always for watching, and good luck!